Hey, Nerd Faithful. Rick from the Big Bang Life here. Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Book and Canvas. I'm here with author guest A.R. Cook. A.R. Cook is most notable for her young adult fantasy trilogy, The Scholar and the Sphinx. Miss Cook, thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me here. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. First off, I wanted to ask you about what kind of got you interested in writing, and was it a particular book or a mentor?
Gosh, I'll try to make a very long story short. But I remember I was writing as young as first grade. That I can still remember at the beginning of the year, they give you a piece of paper, has about 20 lines on it for you to write all your short stories, the titles of the short stories you'd write over the year. I not only filled out the front, I flipped the paper over, drew about 50 more lines, and filled out the back. Wow. And so it's just something I've always done. And probably my primary inspiration for that was my father. He's a playwright. He's actually a full-time actor and a playwright.
Oh, wow.
And when I was in kindergarten, my whole class went to see a children's play he had written called Feathertop. It's actually based on a Nathaniel Hawthorne short story.
I see.
And I just remember feeling so proud that my dad had done this. Like, that's what I got to do. I'm going to do that, too.
Right.
And probably the book that got me into fantasy, though, was Lloyd Alexander's The Cat Who Wished to Be a Man. Because that was just an interesting story. I loved the characters. It was my first foray into fantasy. And then I started reading Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman books. It kind of went on from there.
Wow.
That started.
That's awesome. And you're most notable for your The Scholar and the Sphinx trilogy. It's going to be a trilogy, is that correct?
Yes. The third book will be out June 28th.
Great. And what inspired you to start that series?
And that's another one that's been a long time in the making, has a lot of evolutions. The first book was actually started as a short story that I submitted to the Writers of the Future contest. Okay. And it didn't win, didn't get picked up, and it kind of sat on a floppy disk, not a jump drive. This is how old it is. It's on a floppy disk for years and years and years. And it was about college where I said, I remember this story and I really liked some of the elements. It just needs to be reworked. Mm-hmm. So I started reworking it, and it got longer and longer the more I reworked it. It was originally a dragon. It became a sphinx. It was originally the medieval era. It became 1852, the Victorian era. So it just went through this huge metamorphosis into something else, and that is what became The Scholar, the Sphinx, and the Shades of Nyx.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm looking forward to wanting to read it, and one of my questions was, because one thing I do is if I'm not reading a book, I'm typically reading audiobooks because I'm traveling a lot or doing other things, and having the audio book is one of my little fun things because hearing it sometimes gives a different aspect to it. Is there plans in the making of possibly going an audio route for your books? I
personally would love that. The Scholar and the Sphinx series, that's actually my publisher's option if she wants to go that route. It's from Knox Robinson Publishing / Mithras Books is their YA imprint.
Okay.
It's up to her. But actually my latest book, it just got released this month. Okay. The Secrets of the Moonstone Heir. That's actually my property, and I've been talking to some people about what's the best audiobook option for that, and Amazon does provide that option.
Yes.
And it's interesting. There's kind of a shared royalty option where you don't have to pay anything up front, and then whoever they pick to do the audio of your book, they just take a share of the royalty. So I may actually do that option for that book.
That would be great. Yeah, I love audiobooks and would love to be able to. I always love to see. Sometimes I like to read them and also hear the audiobook, because sometimes you get, from what I've learned from audiobooks, is sometimes you get a different flavor from it sometimes. Yes. And can see things a little differently or pick up on details that you may have missed when you actually read the book. And for me, that's a big thing because I'm so ADHD sometimes. So.
Well, the thing is, audiobooks saved my life for a little while because I used to have an hour and 45-minute commute every day to and then from Atlanta because I live out in Gainesville.
Yeah.
And I would have lost my mind if I didn't have audiobooks.
Absolutely.
So absolutely love them.
That's great. Now, young adult fantasy seems to have taken a huge step forward in pop culture in the past decade. I feel, Hunger Games, Divergent, and we've seen many of the young adult works translate to that big screen and have impacted a great deal of youth as well as young adult readers. In your opinion, where do you see the direction of young adult fantasy heading in the next decade? And will it be for the good or for the bad with Hollywood on the tail end?
That is a question that all of us YA writers wish we could answer, because if we could see where it was going, we would totally write that and make sure we were on the in. But it's kind of fun to see where it goes. On the one hand, I think what it's veering away from, because there's been so much of this, is dystopian future. Like you said, Divergent, Hunger Games, those have all very, very dystopian. And while those were popular, I think people are like, we're kind of tired of a dark, dreary future. We want to get away from that.
Right.
So it'll be kind of interesting to see what that incarnates into. I think we'll always have people who love fantasy on some level. Obviously, urban fantasy, I think, is what's big right now. A lot of people are asking for that. So it might see more of that. And one thing, I feel like Hollywood gets more loyal in their movie adaptations of these books depending on how popular the series is, because you have fans who are going to be rabid if you don't get it right.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. So, like the Harry Potter books and the Hunger Games movies, I think were pretty dead on to the books. I haven't seen the Divergent movies, but I've heard that they kind of got away from the source material. Even though they were popular, there wasn't as much stress to make sure that was dead on with the books. Right. So I hope Hollywood stays true to source material.
I hope so too. And was there a particular book series that's impacted you in your life as a writer?
Oh, there's been a lot, but I think I mentioned before, I started reading Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, and there's kind of 9 books in that whole series that they do, and that definitely got me into the classic high fantasy genre in terms of series. I'd have to go back, but I know I've read some Terry Brooks, Magic Kingdom for Sale, started getting into that series just because that was a much more lighthearted take on it. Those characters are really funny. So there's been a lot of series, but I think those are the 2 principal ones that at least shaped how I view fantasy and enjoy fantasy.
And Terry Brooks came out with the Shannara Chronicles also on television. Have you had a chance to see any of those at all?
I've not had a chance. That's definitely on my list.
Neither have I really.
I know, and I feel like I'm cheating a little bit if I start watching the TV series before the book. I watch Game of Thrones, and I feel like no, I need to go back and read the books.
Right. I feel that way sometimes too when I'm watching those. Now you've been coming to JordanCon for a few years at least, correct?
Right. Actually, this is year number 2.
Okay, and how has Robert Jordan's legacy as a fantasy writer impacted you as a writer?
Well, you can see the impact in general. We have a whole convention based around Robert Jordan, and he's right up there with Tolkien in terms of the authors who have defined classic epic fantasy. So I keep seeing his name coming up, and now Brandon Sanderson is, taking over the Wheel of Time series, and I just got through Way of Kings, so that was me getting back into that genre again, because it's kind of hard to balance writing time and reading time.
Oh, yeah.
So obviously I see the impact that Robert Jordan has had, and I'm thankful for writers like that, especially with a genre that it's very niche, so it's hard to get people outside of the fantasy genre to try it. But then with someone as prolific as he, sometimes it's a good way to get people to start cultivating new fans into that genre.
Yeah. Now, we did touch a bit about movies, books adapting into movies. If you had to pick a book to become a movie, which books that you've written so far would you like to see in movie form or TV show form? Well,
obviously all of them, if I could. But honestly,
pick one.
If I had to pick one, it would probably be the first Scholar and Sphinx book. Okay. And mainly just because it has a very diverse cast, and it covers a lot of different world mythologies. So, and I've talked with my husband about it all the time. He'd always say, who would you cast as such and such? Yeah. And so I've already got a cast in my head. It's like, I'm going to get Tom Hiddleston to be the villain, and I'm going to get Emma Watson to be at least the Sphinx from the shoulders up.
That would be cool. Yeah.
So yes, absolutely that one. Just because I think it's the most interesting hodgepodge too. It's not just fantasy. It's not just historical fiction. It's a little bit of everything.
And what do you think would be a good reminder to give to up-and-coming writers doing young adult novels and short stories?
Of course, every writer will say this, you just got to keep writing, and you are going to hit a lot of walls along the way. You're going to start sharing your work, and there are going to be people who either say, oh, give up, you're no good, or tear you down. You just got to keep going, because you'll get better the longer you go. And, of course, read a lot, because I know there's a lot of writers who I'll ask, what are your favorite books? Like, oh, I don't really read. It's how are you writing if you didn't read it, if you don't read a lot?
Right.
It's the only way that you can get better, and also read outside your genre.
Yeah.
If you love fantasy, read some mainstream fiction, read some mystery, read some memoirs, because you'll find out how much that helps you in your own genre.
Yeah. That's awesome. And tell me a bit about your newest publication, The Secrets of the Moonstar Heir, or just a little bit more.
Absolutely. Well, this is the first in what I'm planning to be 4 books. And it's actually the very first fantasy novel I ever wrote, way back even before this. So that tells you how old that is. But I picked it up, I've reworked it a little bit, and it was originally an experiment. It was part of a free anthology that was on Amazon for a while, just to give people a taste of what the book was about. And I started getting emails saying, where's the next part? I want to know what happens to these characters, what's the rest of it? Like, okay, that's a good sign. That's a good experiment. So now I've released book 1. Book 2 is actually already written, just needs cover art. So I'm hoping to get that out actually before the end of the year, if it's possible. And it's kind of another epic high fantasy. It's about a young woman who has inherited powers from a dragon who is now deceased. And she's afraid to use these powers because she really can't control them. But she's kind of called into action when a distortionist comes on the scene. And a distortionist is, imagine you had the power of Photoshop to pull and stretch and bend things however which way. Now imagine if you could do that on people, animals, everything around you. That's kind of scary, not to mention incredibly evil. So
That's crazy.
So she's called into action to go up against him, and she has to probably use those magical powers at some point.
Wow. And you mentioned earlier, your third book in your Scholar and Sphinx Trilogy will be coming out in June.
Correct.
And what can readers expect and hope for with it closing up without spoiling too much?
Well, I will admit, I'm usually my own worst critic, but I'll say book 3 is probably the strongest of these 3 because the characters are fully developed at that point. It is kind of writing off what happens in book 2, but we get even a bigger cast. We get our big climactic finale. I think we get some of the best verbally visual scenes in book 3. There's also a lot more. Like the mythologies I focus on in that one is African folklore, some Russian folklore, some Norse mythology, and that's a really interesting pair-up.
Oh, absolutely.
You realize.
Yeah.
So it's fun to see how it all comes together.
Yeah.
So.
Well, Mrs. Cook, I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate you taking the time because I know you got a busy weekend. You got fans to see, panels to do, books to sell, hopefully, and it's because it's going to be a busy weekend. And I just want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and see us and answer some amazing questions. Again, thank you so much for being here today and talking with us.
I was glad to. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, we'll see you later, Faithful. Have a good one.